Hello, everyone. This is Fixable from the TED Audio Collective. I'm Ann Morris.
I'm Frances Fry.
Dr. Becky, as she is known by her millions of fans, is a clinical psychologist and best-selling author of Good Inside, A Guide to Being the Parent You Want to Be.
You know, one of the things I was thinking about getting ready for this and how excited you were for this conversation is that there are very few days where I feel like I'm a good leader and a good parent. But most days I feel like I'm good at one.
Yeah, one or the other.
And imagine if we could borrow from one and make it contagious to the other.
Let's get right to it and bring Dr. Becky in. Dr. Becky, welcome to Fixable.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
You and I gave TED Talks the same year, and I was in the audience when you gave your terrific, now viral talk, and I had two thoughts as I was sitting there. One was that this woman could make me a much better parent. And the second was that so much of what you were saying seemed to apply not just to parenting, but also to leadership, which is the thing that we think about all day. It feels like you are teaching all of us not only how to be better parents, but how to get better at any relationship that's important to us. And particularly relationships where there's some kind of power imbalance, as there so often is in leadership.
I think parenting is leadership in its rawest form. And so I actually have always said Good Inside is about sturdy leadership. I say we help parents become sturdy, confident leaders so they can raise sturdy, confident kids. When we talk to different people about the benefits of Good Inside, it often has nothing to do with their kids. They're like, I managed this situation at work, or I asked my boss for a raise. I've been wanting to do that for a while. Or I actually told someone in my office they're not getting a raise this year. And that conversation went so well based on how I actually learned how to talk to my kid about them not having a sleepover on a weeknight. Like, is that weird? And I was like, that's not weird at all. That when we learn how to understand ourselves and understand people, when you learn that embodying your authority can go hand in hand with really connecting to someone else and understanding them, then you actually just start to see the world differently, and you can apply those lessons anywhere.
I love this word sturdy and the idea of solving for sturdy, particularly in the conditions that so many people are trying to lead right now. High speed, high uncertainty.
Yep.
And so we talk a lot about emotional frequency on the show. What's the emotional frequency that I'm going to choose? It is my choice. What am I going to choose in this moment that is going to set other people up for success?
I think there's a couple of ways I can go into that word. One, I think it's your ability at once to be connected to yourself and your values and to be connected to someone else in their reality. We're often better at one or the other. We're really living in someone else's head and thinking about what they may or may not be thinking or feeling, and we self-abandon in the process, or we're so rooted in what we know and what we feel that you almost can't entertain the idea that someone else could have a very real experience that's different from your own. And to me, sturdy leaders can do both, even in the same moment.
One of the things that I've felt in response to your work is relief. And I'm curious what you are hoping your audience feels and doesn't feel as we face the complexity of our lives.
I could start with what I hope they don't feel. That's really easy for me. I hope they don't feel like, oh my goodness, I got it all wrong. I messed up my kid forever. I definitely hope they don't feel the finality of that.
They already feel that.
You know what?
I think inheriting all of these messages.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hope they don't feel that the goal is any type of perfection. Somehow the idea that if we learn something, we're going to be perfect at it just starts to associate in our brain, and it almost gets in our way of signing up for learning. What I want people to feel is more empowered, more hopeful, more compassionate, more powerful, and more playful.
We talk about playful all the time in the work that we do, both as a goal and also as an indicator that you are bringing your best self to the challenge of leadership. So if we often will bring playfulness into the room, even in very high stakes situation, because it invites people to bring their sturdy, yes, creative, can-do spirit to whatever problem we're solving.
You're catching me on a day yesterday. I happened to run a brand new workshop, which I had never done, but someone said to me, you teach parents so many things, but you don't teach parents how to play. And for most of us, it's a source of pain, and it doesn't come naturally. And I think that's because most of those parents didn't have any parent who played with them. And it was such an amazing invitation. And it can be so manageable to kind of ease into play. And it is often the answer to like the hardest moments, ironically.
How does sturdiness and playfulness in this conversation connect to good inside, which is this meta frame on so much of what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I was getting trained as a clinical psychologist, and definitely in the extra training I did for how to work with parents in terms of parenting, by the way, all that training was completely the opposite, basically, of what I recommend now. But I think we have two operating views when we interact with people, which is I see what's visible, which is somebody's bad behavior, right? That's visible, whether it's an employee who's always late or interrupting on Zoom, or it's my kid who's in a hitting phase or says, I hate you, whenever I say no. I agree, bad behavior. But we have this collapse that happens in our mind where, to me, two things, and it's helpful even put your hands separate, is to look at one and be like, this is behavior, it's what someone does. And the other hand is, this is identity, and it's who someone is. And one view that happens is we see bad behavior, and the two hands are no longer separate. They're just collapsed. And so I think I'm responding to someone's bad behavior, but I'm not. My whole mindset is I assume this is a bad person. Bad behavior means bad person. And then if there's a bad person, of course you're going to punish them, and you're going to also feel really desperate. Like old models of parenting, I always think, everyone's like, oh, it's no parents punish their kids anymore. I'm like, I'm sorry. You have a 4-year-old hitting, and the best thing you can say as a parent is go to your room and no dessert tonight. It's like pathetic. It's so pathetic. Like, can you imagine an amazing CEO to someone who's late being like, well, I'm not ordering you lunch today? I'd be like, oh my God, that's like so weak. Like, that's the best you get. But we have those reactions because we feel desperate and scared because of the collapse of behavior and identity. And I think when I started challenging my own beliefs, because I was in private practice telling every parent how to do a timeout and punishment and sticker chart. I liked at that time to be a good student and to do as taught. And it just started to get so loud in me. I was like, this is wrong. Like, that's not how I handle adults in my practice. When they tell me about their bad behavior, I don't take away their cell phone. And I think when I stripped everything away, like, I was really left with two things only. One, kids are born good inside. There's good identity that's separate from bad behavior. And it sounds so simple, but it's literally a massive worldview difference. And that doesn't make the behavior okay. It just means now I have a foundation to understand the gap between identity and behavior and to intervene based on that gap versus based on seeing the whole thing together. And then the other thing I was left with is kids are born with the feelings and none of the skills. They're good kids who are having a hard time because they need more skills. And nobody's ever been taught the skill from being sent to their room or having their dessert taken away.
Capability gap in our language.
Love it. Yeah. Same.
I love it. All right, I want to move on to some tactics. And we want to spend some time on this concept of repair, which we think about all the time in our work. So particularly in fast-moving, ambitious organizations, relationships get injured. So tell us what repair is and why should we care about it?
So repair is the act of going back to a moment that felt bad, taking ownership over your part, and stating what you would do differently the next time, right? And what's important to understand about repair is the reason why it matters so much and why it becomes such a superpower when you start to build that muscle. So first of all, when an uncomfortable moment happens between you and a person you care about, right, and you want to stay in a relationship with, an employee, a partner, a kid, that experience lives in their body. Like, you could talk about it or not talk about it, but at the end of the day, it lives in their body. So I'm either going to leave that person alone with the experience, in which case they have to make up their own story to understand, right? Humans learn by stories. That's all. And so stories have a huge role. And so if I'm really upset because my boss yelled at me or whatever it was in a meeting, I'm upset. Nobody can take the upset away, no matter how much they try to invalidate it. It already happened. Either my boss never mentions it again, in which case I have to make up a story. The story might be, I'm so stupid, I'm the worst, in which case I'm going to do awful work for, the rest of the time, because that's how I start to identify. Or I hate my boss has it out for me, and maybe I'm going to start coming in late, or I don't know, stealing a lot of snacks, or just not doing my best work also because, I feel misunderstood. right? Now, if someone repairs, like they actually have the power of helping that other person tell a story that's actually in line with probably what's closer to reality and what's going to be better for the relationship. So at work, I'd say, hey, I yelled at you earlier. Look, it's true I was frustrated. That's totally separate from how I manage it. And it's never okay that I yelled at you. I'm sure that felt bad. And I'm going to work on staying calmer. Now, after this repair, yes, the upset feeling still lives there, but there's a container for it. It's not free floating in someone's body. And there's a story. And anyone I know probably leaves the office, I don't know, calling someone being like, I had a really amazing moment with my boss. And they're like, didn't your boss yell at you a couple of weeks ago? And they're like, oh, yeah, I guess that happened. I was upset. But how good it feels to get a repair so surpasses how bad it feels to have a bad moment. And so I'm just a very practical person. Like I say this to CEOs all the time or parents. Like it's an easy win. It's like a really easy win, right? And same thing with your kids. I mean, the thing that's a little different about kids, they're probably not that different, is kids resort to one main story when they're upset with their parents and their parents don't repair. It's my fault. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad kid. I make bad things happen. Because for a kid whose survival is dependent on their relationship with their parent, when they're upset after, let's say, their parent yelled at them, it's actually intolerable for a kid to say, well, I think my parent just has an anger problem, or my parent isn't great. You can't be dependent on someone for your survival and assume the fault is in them. That's really scary for a kid. And so they have to conclude, well, I'm bad, right? I think I quoted this in my TED Talk, but it's better to be a sinner in a world ruled by God than live in a world ruled by the devil. That truth dictates child development.
Just like a PSA aside on this, the muscle memory of that story comes with us as adults into every workplace and every relationship with every authority figure for the rest of our lives.
That's exactly right. Because when you have an uncomfortable moment, as a 40-year-old in the workplace and you get yelled at, you don't process it as a 40-year-old. We scan our bodies and we kind of say, what have I learned in terms of how I make sense of uncomfortable moments with people I care about? And your body's like, oh, I know. It's all your fault. You're a piece of shit, right? Well, that was a story you had to tell yourself from an unrepaired moment in your childhood. And not one moment, probably patterns of moments. And now it's coming alive in your present. And so when I repair with my kids, I visualize like, okay, I yelled at my son and he's starting to tell himself the story of, I'm a bad kid, I'm a bad person. And I really do picture myself like going in and like snatching it. Like, no, I'm not going to let you do that. And then I do picture him as a 40-year-old who's like, hey, I want my kid, if they get yelled at, right, to be able to say, hey, that wasn't cool. I don't deserve that. Now, what I do next, I have to figure out, but I don't want my kid to tell themselves the story of low self-worth in that moment. That's really toxic. That actually gets people locked into really toxic relationships. And so, yes, the benefit of repair happens now, but especially when you have young kids, it also means you're shaping how they're going to think about future difficult moments.
So I want to go after this in kind of three parts. So the first part is I am the boss in that story who's yelled at a junior person on my team, let's say. So I'm the boss in the story. And then I want to also go after it from the perspective of the person who has been yelled at, because I think one thing that is different between parenting and leadership is that in a leadership story, regardless of how you feel, there are two adults with agency in the story. And so what can I do I may feel like a 12-year-old being yelled at by a parent, or a 4-year-old, or my 6-year-old self might have shown up for this, but I am a grown-ass woman who does have some choices I can make in that moment. So I'm curious, how do we repair? And then how would you coach the boss through that scene? And then how would you coach the person receiving that harsh tone, feedback, getting yelled at?
Before the repair, how do I just deal with this if it wasn't repaired?
Like, how do I metabolize it? But also, are there choices I can make in that situation that can accelerate the repair? Do I have any power in that situation to accelerate the repair? But let's do the straightforward. I'm a boss. I yelled at someone on my team. I regret it. I want to repair the situation. Take us through the steps.
So I think the first question is, well, what's blocking me? Like, because it's easy to go through the steps if you're like, yeah, I'm going to do it, right? And I can share a script, but usually it's not that simple because there's something blocking us. It's like, oh, I don't want to do that. Or it might be a worry, like, I'm worried I'm going to lose my power. We could explore that. But to me, the single biggest thing that blocks anybody from repairing is they haven't done a necessary first step, which is actually repairing with themselves. Because again, we're going to get to the same themes. Most of us were raised in a way where we did not inherently separate behavior from identity. So you just screamed at some employee. I'm sure there's a party that's like, that was not how I wanted to show up. That's not me at my best. And as long as you don't repair, you don't have to face the reality of what you just did. Most people who really have a hard time apologizing, people say they're so cold-hearted, they don't care. I actually see them in a very different way. I think there's actually something very vulnerable and almost fragile. Like, oh, you have such a hard time believing you could be a good boss who did yell, that you have to not see it and repair, kind of in the service of trying to hold yourself together. A good repair is actually a reminder, just separating your identity from your behavior. I'm a good person who, I'm a good CEO who, I'm a good boss who, I'm a good parent who. That's an amazing sentence starter because it literally, concretely forces you to separate your identity from something you just did. So I'd say, if it was me, I'd put my feet on the floor, I'd sit, I'd put my hand on my heart. I'd say, Becky, okay, I'm a good person who yelled. And then you'll see a trick. I'd be like, no, I'm the worst. And that was so bad. Oh, no, come back. I'm a good person who yelled. I always like this phrase too. I'm not defined by my latest behavior. I can do this. And then to me, the sign that I'm ready to truly repair with someone, I wish I had a better way of saying this, but like I feel this small shift in my body. Something releases a little where it just doesn't feel as heavy and final.
Yeah, I want to really underscore this point because we have a lot of, again, listeners with the bias for action. And I think when something breaks, we want to fix it and we want to jump to that repair. But the point you're making is that you will not be as effective or get where you want to go unless you take a beat and just acknowledge that break with your values and identity.
That's exactly right. Because it's kind of like when we were all kids, if like your parent picked you up late from somewhere, and I'm sure they felt guilty. And all of a sudden you're like, I feel like my parents trying now for me to make them feel better. Like, well, I had a big meeting and there's a lot of traffic. And now as a kid, you have to be like, oh, it's no big deal. And you're like, wow, instead of getting something from my parent, I'm sorry, I'm late. That probably felt scary, or sorry, I missed your soccer game. Now I have to give something to my parent. It really feels bad. And my guess in that situation, the reason that happened is because a parent did not repair with themselves. And you have to have that experience of being like, boy, I'm not a horrible person. And if I don't do it for myself, you're going to be unconsciously trying to get it from the person, ironically, you're trying to give the repair to. And same thing in an office. Like you'd probably end up saying to someone, look, I'm sorry I yelled. Those things happen sometimes. Or I'm sorry I yelled. You yell sometimes too, right? We all have our moments. And the power dynamic is all off. And again, if I think about sturdiness, like I'm not going to go to my 6-year-old to make me feel better. And like, I'm not going to go to my marketing manager to make me feel like a good CEO. Like, it just makes me think of a pilot, like, hey guys, that was a little turbulence, but like, I'm a good pilot, right? And you're like, oh my God, right? Like, get hold of yourself.
But you are saying that you do have to have that relationship with yourself.
And start developing it.
Okay, now talk us through
the repair.
Talk us through the repair step.
And I'll talk you through and then a common question after. Okay, so really, like I would just start with, I'm sorry for
yelling at you.
Yeah,
right.
I'm sorry for yelling. Sorry for yelling earlier. I keep thinking about a moment that happened 3 weeks ago when I yelled, and I'm sorry for doing that. And then saying to someone something like, that wasn't your fault, I think is really helpful to remove the fault. And then either saying what you think that probably felt like for them, which could be, I'm sure that felt bad, especially surrounded by other people. I want to acknowledge that. Or stating what you would do differently. It's kind of like a cocktail of things that could help. Look, the truth is I was frustrated in that meeting, but it's my responsibility to manage that in a respectful way. That's not on you. And so I think, name what happened, right? Like acknowledge what that was probably like and state what you would do differently. And then we actually do have to work on the thing we said we do differently, or else it does start to feel empty, right? And then here's the question I often get. Like, but the person does keep coming late or does keep interrupting. So it was kind of their fault, right? Or for a kid. But like Dr. Becky, I mean, they weren't listening to me about putting their shoes on, right? So it kind of was their fault. We've just separated again two things. How we feel in a situation is multifaceted. Like, I felt frustrated. Of course, that frustration is related to the fact that my kid isn't putting on their shoes. I felt frustrated in the meeting because someone kept interrupting. Of course, yes. But we have to separate a feeling we're having and how we manage the feeling. And the truth is, how we manage our feelings predates our relationship with that employee and predates our child's existence. That has so much historical context.
Shocking.
Right? And the reason why it's also a really bad apology, I always think about this. If that's the way I always apologize to my son, like, I'm sorry for yelling, but, I wouldn't have if, you just listened the first time. Then what I'm setting up someone to do as my son is to, like, one day I'm going to hear him say to his partner, like, look, I'm sorry I yelled, but if you remembered the paper towels, I mean, I wouldn't have yelled at you. Like, can you imagine? You're like, oh my goodness, I raised like kind of a creep. That's so creepy. So how we connect to other people determines how they connect to themselves and people in their world. And that's what culture is too. So how I repair or don't repair with somebody in a meeting is going to also dictate the culture with which they do or do not repair or just blame someone else on the team for their bad behavior. So if we think big picture, I can't imagine that's what any senior executive thinks would be productive.
So there's this whole subset of management literature that focus on apology. But what's really fun about people who really study this is that the payoff, the kind of non-intuitive payoff, is that more often than not, the relationship gets stronger than it was before the harm took place. So you have customers spending more money, you have people being, more loyal. Like, it's a very straight line from effective repair to a better relationship. And that is very hard, I think, for the human brain to really internalize.
I think that's exactly right. And like, this from, in my mind, the best data we have, which is the data in our body about how something would feel. Where imagine if your parent now, if you're an adult, would call you, and just even now. So like, I'm thinking about this stuff from your younger years, and there were so many times I sent you to your room, and probably those were the times you needed me the most. And I really wish I had done that differently. And I worry it's too late to tell you this, but those moments weren't your fault. I didn't know. And I wish I did. And I know a little bit now. And if you're ever willing to talk to me about any of it, like, I'm going to listen, just listen to understand, not prove anything. I don't know one adult who would tell me anything else, but like, that probably wouldn't change everything, but that would change a lot of things. That would feel really good. And so, yeah, the same thing again with our own kids, in the office, with your partner. I whenever I talk about repair, and it's like, if like everyone in the audience is like, I'm going to repair with someone today. I'm going to repair with someone for something little today, from something big from 5 years ago. I feel like you'd feel the ripples of this like positivity in the world of like a repair day. Maybe we should make that. It's like repair day is a certain day of the month.
It should be a national holiday.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not hearing that there's an expiration date on repair.
There's not, and it doesn't even have to be that specific. If it would feel good in your body for your parent to even just say, I keep thinking about a lot of stuff I did, and it probably felt bad. If that's all they said, still, you'd be like, wow. So, and I also think the thing about no expiration date, if you think about, again, like you're an executive and you say to someone, look, this thing is like eating at me. I still remember it. I don't know if you do. Imagine just on the receiving end, you're like, wow, like you were still holding that in your mind. It's a very powerful human feeling to be held in somebody's mind.
I love it. And when we have talked about this with teams and individual leaders, we spend a lot of time on that third part of what we would language use as security. So you have to make sure, people feel seen. You have to make sure that you're clearly valuing the relationship, and also that people are no longer insecure in terms of worrying if this is going to happen again. So you have to make it clear to your customers and your team and your colleagues that the behavior is ending we've talked about Boeing on this show, and we've talked about, other high profile whole companies that are engaged in the process of repair with their stakeholders right now.
Yeah.
And we're cheering them on, but some of these organizations are not there yet. But you said that quickly, and I want to know where this lives in your model, that final piece of being convincing that this behavior is going to end, the harm is going to end.
Yeah, I think being convincing that someone's going to work on something comes from something that's often missing too, which is being really direct and honest about what the pain was. When you hear someone skirting around that or saying a version that wasn't actually your experience of it, it doesn't even matter what they say come next. You didn't trust them from the start. And I think this is counter to like a lot of PR advice. But again, I just think, let's say it's, shareholders or consumers who are like, I'm a consumer of your company. Like, I already felt the thing that you did. Like, you can pretend
You're not
it wasn't
saying it, right?
It already happened, right? And to hear someone name that, and I think it's bold. And I'm sure there's nuance here, but I don't know. The truth feels good.
I'm telling you, the management literature backs you up on this, and it's very counterintuitive in kind of the legalistic environment.
Yeah. And so then the next steps, I think people want to hear things that are concrete and they want to see evidence. So if I think about that related to steps after repair, it's like, here's what I'm going to do. And then I think what people or companies could even do is proactively tell, hey, do you remember we said this? Here's our progress so far. I think what feels bad is it goes into the ether and then you're like, is that even real? Right? And so, yeah, it probably is counterintuitive, even though, again, I'm guessing data supports that because it's just based on the truth.
So let's go back to that scene of someone being yelled at by their boss. So coach the other person in this scene on how to metabolize this experience and what, if anything, they can do to help put this relationship on a path of repair, even though they weren't the so-called perpetrator.
So first, I think that, again, just separating behavior from identity again, comes into play here. Because especially, let's say you're a junior employee, you just get yelled at. And I know too, when I'm yelling at someone, I had such a bad day for a million things. And I was just waiting for one tiny, somewhat irrelevant thing. And then I hadn't metabolized it. So it all comes out. So, but I think you could say, look, notice the spiral, which probably comes from that moment, all of a sudden being a barometer of your worth. Right? And if you notice that, you can start to separate it. I put your feet on the ground. I'd say, okay, I'm even gonna visualize. I'm a good person. I'm a good whatever you are. I'm a good product manager, whatever the company is, who just had a really emotionally difficult moment in that meeting. I always like to say two things are true. Our brains, especially this day and age in the world, likes to go to one thing is true mode. Right? And so what happens is you feel so uncomfortable. So you're like, my career in world is over because that would be one thing is true versus two things are true. I've been actually doing a pretty good job at this company. My latest review, my conversations with people, I also have an internal barometer of my work. That is all true. And what is equally true is I had a moment that felt really bad and I have some very understandable, uncomfortable emotions about that. Anybody would panic. To me, the phrase, I'll go through this thing called AVP. I think it's the ultimate emotion coping. A is acknowledge, V validate, P permit. So A, acknowledge, say, okay, just acknowledge to me is kind of saying hi. Hi, racing heart. Hi, thoughts that I'm going to get fired. Just saying hi to you, acknowledging it. And then V, validate. Everyone talks about validating feelings, but I feel like it's hard to operationalize that. To me, validating feelings is telling yourself or someone else that their feelings make sense. I just think there's something about the phrase make sense that our feelings love. I always kind of imagine our feelings feel accepted by logic or something. They're like, oh, finally. And so to say, well, I did just get yelled at publicly, so it makes sense I'd have a racing heart and some worries about being fired. That just makes sense. And then P, permit, would just be saying to yourself, I give myself permission to be having all these feelings. And then after that, to me, we have a really important phrase that comes next that's always the same. And I can cope with this. Our feelings don't inherently give us problems as much as the way we talk to ourselves about our feelings give us problems. And I think the other things that feelings can do that are tricky is they make you lose touch with just this inherent truth about you, which is that you're capable. you can cope with hard things. You've probably coped with many hard things in the past. This is one that you're going to do again. And as soon as you can hold together validation of your feelings and being in touch with your capability, like it sounds dramatic, but like the world changes. And then in terms of how I would repair the relationship, let's say you have a boss who doesn't repair. I don't know. Maybe you're doing that thing with your feelings and you move on, right? And maybe you're like, but I do actually think I could talk to my boss about it. Like I think about people in my company who'd be like, Becky, like that didn't feel good. And Becky would want to know if, as a valuable person at Good Inside, I'm about to leave, like because of this thing and the series. Like she would want to know that, or she should want to know that. And to me, another phrase that just can take any hard conversation from conflictual to actually connecting and productive is just saying out loud to someone, we're on the same team. Hey, I want to talk to you about something hard. I feel a little awkward. But you know what I always come back to, Becky? Like, you and I are on the same team. Like, we're on the same team in general. We're definitely on the same team and wanting what's good to Good Inside. And I feel like you'd want to know about something that was getting in my way of like feeling as good and productive at work. And so with that in mind, I want to share something. And then all the classic stuff, using I and not you, that really matters, right? But what you do with this little preamble is you preload a story in someone else's mind to interpret your words through, right? So they're less likely to say like, oh, this person just thinks I'm awful. It's like almost giving me credit. It's true. I am a CEO who wants the best for my company. Well, yes, you're right about that. Thank you. Yeah. It's like, and then I can hear someone say, look, you yelled at me in this meeting. We all have our moments. I don't even know if it was the yelling or the not saying something to me after. It probably was that felt bad. And honestly, we could have that moment now. And I just figured I owe it to you to let you know that. But I kind of still feel like I need that. And again, we're on the same team. And I figured you and I could talk through that.
I love that, Becky. And you're such a fantastic coach. I'm going to throw a couple more scenarios at you. The other way I've coached people through that moment is like, listen, this thing happened. And what I'm concluding from this is this. And I want to test with you if that's the right thing I should conclude from that.
I love that.
From the decision you made. You seem pretty worked up about the fact that I'm late. I'm interpreting that as this, like, you're thinking this is a sign of disrespect. That's not what I meant. So I just want to test the story and I want to tell you what I'm going to be doing differently. And now we're in a conversation.
Writing yourself the repair you need from your boss or from your parents is, I know everyone's reaction is like, that's so cheesy. You really think I'm going to do that? But it is so powerful. Because the truth is we probably aren't getting that from the parent. And we might not get that from the boss. But when you externalize it, like here's what my boss would say to me in an email, it really has a profound impact.
My therapist just forced me to do that about a scene from my childhood. It's a very profound exercise. And it never even occurred to me to think about bringing that into the workplace. So let me give you a couple more scenarios. Like Dr. Becky, the coach here.
Let's do it.
My company just made a major policy change that's upsetting people on my team. What can I do to help them metabolize the change?
So always start with kind of hearing someone out, wanting to learn more, and validating someone's feelings. I just want to be clear. It never means you agree with the feeling at all. Validating someone's feelings and being willing to learn more just says, I believe this is true for you. I believe this is true for you. And I think at our souls, we're all just looking to feel believed. And I have 3 lines that I think every manager and definitely parent should just have in their back pocket. The first line is just, I'm so glad you're talking to me about this. It's actually saying to someone in a deep way, the part of you that feels this way can be in a relationship with me.
That's such powerful framing. I love it.
So powerful, right? And again, I always think, if I said to my boss, I think I deserve a raise, and let's say they were like, there's no way Becky's getting a raise. But the first thing they said was, first of all, I'm so glad you came to me with this. I'm so glad you're talking to me about this. And that usually does allow someone to tell you a lot more because it's an invitation to talk more. They're like, yeah, this policy change, it's awful, it's this. I would say, look, that makes sense, sir. I believe you. That phrase, I believe you, just like such a win. It's the ultimate confidence building phrase for kids. Again, it gets to the core of what someone wants. I believe you. And then I think you could have in your pocket the third line should just tell me more. And then I think where you go from there depends on where someone is. They might have just wanted to explore that arc. It might be, look, let's check in on this in a week, because sometimes the changes we imagine really are as bad as we worry. Sometimes the changes we imagine aren't as bad as we worry, and only time and information will tell us more. So maybe we could even put a date in the calendar. That's something I know I need. It's like an anchor. If someone's like, let's talk about this again, I'm like, I don't trust that. That's an open file. If they're like, let's talk about this Friday, 2:15 to 2:25, I'm like, oh, amazing. And now I can like go on with my day. And so I'd put an anchor, and then I'd proactively check in and go from there.
I want to throw one more scenario at you. So I'm a leader who's frustrated with the performance of some of my direct reports. How do I create a healthy sense of urgency and accountability?
When you're struggling, there's nothing that feels as good as somebody seeing potential in you. I really think that. It feels so good that someone can see a part of you that you can't access in that moment. That's true for kids. That's true for employees. So I do something with that in mind. So let's say, hey, we're on the same team. And I'm just going to state things I think we both know. But if not, then at least we have clarity. This, I don't know, whatever. Moving this metric really matters. Or having this shipped by this date is kind of like the end all and be all. So that's kind of where we are. And I've been noticing, it's a good phrase, I've been noticing that our deadlines aren't being hit. And then I think a curiosity around your role is really helpful to reduce defensiveness. It makes me wonder if I haven't been clear enough about the deadline. It makes me wonder if I'm not giving you something that you could use to run at it. It makes me wonder if you feel so much pressure that you honestly just need to hear from me once a day, like, I believe in you, you've got this, let's freaking go. It makes me wonder about what I can do, because what I know is that we or you are not operating at the level we need to get where we need to go. And again, I believe in you. I believe we can do this. We're on the same team. Let's figure this out together and end this meeting with 3 specific things that can help this go in a more urgent direction.
Dr. Becky, where can people go to learn more about what you're up to?
I mean, goodinside.com. We try to keep it simple. There you can find our podcast. You can find our membership. Our chat bot is like, if you're like, I wonder what Becky would say about this, or I just need help in a pinch, like, that's part of it. And so we have pretty good technological solutions for a lot of things in our life. And I really do believe parents have been left behind. I think this idea of maternal instinct is responsible. Like the idea that we could brainwash women to think the hardest job in the world comes naturally is like a real sick joke at best. And that's really big picture what we want to
So
change.
good.
So goodinside.com. That's where it all lives.
And there's a perfect analog to leadership, because people think, oh, you have, like, you're either born a good leader or not, which is also absurd.
Exactly. Well, thank you for the work you're doing to undo that narrative and to give actionable guidance that make people feel just like the best version of themselves.